Tonight's speaker brings a special eye to observing our nation, a nation that he loves, championed, and joined as a citizen in 2021. Steve Hilton was born in Britain to parents who had fled communism in Hungary. From humble beginnings that greatly informed his sensibilities, Steve worked his way to 10 Downing Street, where he was a senior strategy advisor to former Prime Minister David Cameron. He moved to the U.S. with his family in 2012, teaching at the Stanford D School before resuming his successful entrepreneurial career. While most of you know Steve from his Fox News channel, his weekly show, The Next Revolution, he also has a brilliant podcast, which I recommend, The Steve Hilton Show, which he describes as a nonpartisan home for everyone who wants to see change from the worsening consequences of one-party rule in his now home state, California. I really like Steve's podcast, but I have to tell you, I think it's kind of like the Liberty Forum, but it's better moderated and it meets more often, so I think you'll enjoy it. He's the author of several books, including Good Business, Your World Needs You, A Defense of Free Enterprise Capitalism, that also called for large corporations to be more accountable for their impact on society. He had a bestseller, More Human, Designing a World Where People Come First, followed in 2018 with Positive Populism, Revolutionary Ideas to Build Economic Security, Family, and Community in America. Positive Populism. I would add a third P to Steve's work. Plain. He plainly calls out the lack of seriousness of leaders to solve problems in San Francisco, the appalling educational proficiency in California, our flight in businesses from California, the massive expansion of our state, the disaster on the border. He calls out our governor plainly for his ideological signaling over the delivery of competent governance. And he calls the cartels transnational narco-terrorists running the Mexican government. Plain and unapologetically clear indeed. Steve's experience renders him with an insider understanding of both the public and the private sector. Tech entrepreneur, author, broadcaster, senior policy advisor, and restaurateur, Steve actually knows how the real and the political sausage is made. Please join me in welcoming Silicon Valley's only cell phone-less celebrity, Steve Hilton.
Well, I've got to start by saying evening, everyone. Welcome to the Next Revolution. That's Sunday night. Welcome to the California Revolution. The Liberty Revolution. That's why we're all here. Great to see you all. Thank you for coming out. I agree, but braving the weather, this is nothing. I mean, Eamon, my English colleague here, I'll get to whether English is the appropriate term. We'll discuss that in a minute. But the colleague from England here, this isn't rain. This is nothing. This is just a normal week in England. As was just mentioned, I don't have a cell phone. I haven't had one for, since we moved here. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. It's about 11 years now. And so was somewhat stuck this evening. Because we, along with many others, this evening, just as I was trying to get the kids organized with their homework, my wife, by the way, she's away in Europe. She's the one with a real big job in our family. So I'm at home trying to make things work. The internet goes down. The power goes down. This is just within the last hour and a half. I can't let anyone know. I don't know the address. I don't have a cell phone. This is what happens. This is Gavin Newsom's California. A bit of rain and you can't do anything. Absolutely ridiculous. But I do appreciate you all coming out. And you stole my line because I do particularly appreciate August. I've just been very close to August there in the front row. The most adorable puppy. I should have brought our two little dogs. They would have had a lovely time. She's so calm. Very happy to see August. Very happy to see all of you. Thank you so much. Just one thing that was just said, I have to just pick up on a phrase that definitely would be remarked upon in our family. You were talking about the plan for this evening, and you used the phrase, after Steve's done talking. Well, in our family, I think that phrase would come up a lot in the sense of, can he please be done talking? We hear enough of Steve talking. And they see it on TV, they see the podcast and think, we don't need to hear it around the kitchen table as well. So after Steve's done talking, that certainly resonated. We were hearing about a QR code, and I was going to leave this till the end, but since a QR code has already been mentioned, since the podcast has already been mentioned, I will add my own little item to the list of announcements and the arrangements for this evening. So I'm going to bring out this card, and you'll find them at the back at the end. And this is the aforementioned Steve Hilton show, and you will find on the back of this card, which you can all pick up, a QR code. So there you are. We have our QR code too. It's not just another person who's got a QR code. We have our own for the Steve Hilton show. I hope you'll all pick something up. If you don't listen to the show, we'd love to have you. We're trying to build a real movement for change here in California, so we'd love to have you join us. Silicon Valley Bank has been shut down and bailed out. I wondered whether every organization with the words Silicon Valley in the title was going to be shut down and bailed out by the Biden administration. I don't think the Liberty Forum counts as something that's going to be bailed out, nor would you accept one. But it is an absolute sign of our times that the bank's collapsing, they're bailing it out, the internet's down, we have power outages. I mean, what is going on? And these people, by the way, Silicon Valley Bank, not many people have made this point, and many people should pay attention to this. It was regulated in California. It is yet another example of the total catastrophic failure of governance here in California. They're talking about the feds and this and that. It was regulated by an agency set up by Gavin Newsom 2 years ago, and controlled by political appointees of Gavin Newsom. I did a little bit of research. The person who runs the agency that regulated Silicon Valley Bank, she may be very qualified in all sorts of ways. She was a political science graduate from Berkeley, and then a lawyer, and she may have had tremendous accomplishments in those fields, but I hardly think it qualifies you to be the regulator of the banking system here in California, and that's why we end up with this kind of situation. YouTube, just a quick note on YouTube. I feel for you in relation to the YouTube video that was taken down. Now, I just want to tell you this story because it just captures how ludicrous this whole YouTube big tech censorship is. A while back, a few months ago, I guess it must have been almost a year ago, we had Professor Jay Bhattacharya, who I'm sure you all know, a good friend, a neighbor of ours here on the peninsula, on the show to talk about vaccine mandates. And he made his completely science-based argument, of course, that vaccines confer a private benefit, not a public one, because they do not prevent transmission. And they were never intended to prevent transmission. And if you read the original documents, it's clear that that was never part of the plan. It was never even asserted by the manufacturers. And so there was absolutely no case whatsoever for any kind of vaccine mandate. We had a perfectly reasonable, science-based conversation about this, put the episode up on YouTube, and then we got the message, which you've just received. Your video has been removed because it breaches our community guidelines. And then we complained through the process on YouTube and said, this doesn't make any sense, show us where, and they said medical misinformation, of course, there's these terms that they throw around. But here's the interesting thing. At the exact same time that we complained, if you like, as regular citizens running the podcast to YouTube through the normal process that everyone else has access to, we challenged the ruling. At the same time, I was about to unleash an assault, a plain spoken assault in your words, on YouTube on my Sunday night show that Sunday on Fox. And we reached out, and Fox, my team at Fox, reached out to YouTube to see if they could have someone come on and respond, as we always would do. And so they're getting the normal complaint in the normal way, as millions of regular citizens would complain. At the same time, the Fox News team is reaching out to them on a corporate level to ask for someone to come and respond to me attacking them on Sunday night. Guess what happened? At almost the exact same moment, like literally within the same hour over the weekend, we got a message back through the normal person channel, which said, our team has carefully reviewed your content, and we can confirm that it does indeed contravene our community guidelines, and therefore our ruling remains in place. Within an hour, the corporate message to my team at Fox News: we're terribly sorry. This video was taken down in error, and this is a mistake, and it's now been reinstated. I mean, what a joke. They're not serious. There's no consistency there. And it shows you, if you're fortunate enough to have a platform, you can push back against this madness. But what about all the people, the billions of people around the world who don't and are silenced unfairly? It's a terrible situation. It's a terrible situation, and it's a great example of what's going on in terms of the assault on liberty. As was mentioned, I'm now a proud American, nearly 2 years now. Thank you so much. I recited the pledge with great pride, as I always do. But it's not just that I was an immigrant, and I love the moment when all the immigrants in the audience and the children of immigrants stood up, because I'm a proud immigrant twice over. Of course, here to America, my family from Hungary to the UK. And there's a story that really captures for me the real challenge that we now face in terms of liberty. Forgive me if you've heard me say this before, but it's to me, I think about this all the time. And it goes back to Hungary, where my family are from, on both sides, my mother and my father, all my family are from Hungary. When I was young, we would visit Hungary a couple of times a year, often spend the whole summer there. With my two cousins, we'd play and do the kinds of things you'd expect young kids to do. It was a beautiful time, actually. I remember it very fondly. There's one memory I have, though, that just keeps coming back to me. My family was from a small town in the south of Hungary called Szeged, S-Z-E-G-E-D. It's nearly on the border. It was then Yugoslavia, now it's Croatia. And I don't know why I was doing this. Perhaps it says something about where I would end up in terms of my career. About 9 or 10 years old, walking on the streets with my cousins, for some reason decided to shout pretty loudly about the leader of Hungary at the time, the communist leader, a guy called János Kádár. He was the general secretary of the Communist Party, whatever. And I said in Hungarian, I speak Hungarian, I said, Kádár egy hülye, which means Kádár's an idiot. Now, why I was going around as a 9 or 10-year-old yelling about the leader of the Communist Party being an idiot, I don't know. But I didn't think anything of it. That evening, my aunt took me to one side. I'll never forget this. It was in her bedroom. She took me to one side and said, look, I heard what you were doing today, and I know that you think that's just a little joke. And it is. And you're not in trouble, but you just need to understand, you can't say things like that here. And actually, if you do that again, your cousins could get in real trouble. And I could get in trouble. She was the teacher, the head teacher of a local school. She said, I could lose my job for that kind of thing. And it really stuck in my mind, and I didn't really think about it very much until the last few years here in America, because that is exactly what's happening. Here in America, people are thinking that. Here in America, people are thinking to themselves, I can't say that because I might lose my job. We have friends here. We've been based here in the valley for 11 years now. Lots of friends in some of the companies that you know very well. A very senior executive saying something very similar, saying, I just can't say what I think in meetings anymore because I don't know how it's going to affect my career. And it's not just about things to do with business. It's about their opinions on anything. That's the reality. A terrible story the other day, just in this article, I don't know if you caught it, in the New York Times from someone at Princeton, a very brave student at Princeton, I may add, who wrote about what's going on there in terms of the assault on free speech, and was just describing this kind of thing. And it was a chilling story, this student wrote, that a member of a sports team, she was the captain, I believe, of a sports team, lost her leadership position, was removed from her leadership position in the sports team as a result of a private conversation with another student about policing. A private conversation about policing with another student, and she's removed from her leadership position in a sports team. I mean, what is going on? It is very, very serious. That is an assault on liberty. And you just see them piling up, one after another. That's freedom of speech. Look at the assaults on liberty we saw particularly here in California during the pandemic. We don't need to remind ourselves of the horror, but just the quick list, the closure of the schools, the closure of small businesses. Well, by the way, the big businesses that are donors to the politicians who make these decisions, they can stay open. The local restaurant has to shut down, but McDonald's is open. Nothing against McDonald's. I love McDonald's, like President Trump. But it's my first job, actually. Nothing against McDonald's, but we should be for the small restaurant. As was mentioned, I started a restaurant. I know what that's like. It outrages me that so many small businesses were forced to close for no scientific reason. That's an assault on liberty. The extraordinary level of regulation that we now see on business, on our lives, that's an assault on liberty. I mean, they talk about we're all going to have to drive electric cars. They're going to ban gas cars. They're banning gas stoves. They're banning gas boilers to heat your home. They can't keep the lights on, but they're going to make us dependent on electricity. And guess what? They're banning gas generators as a backup. I mean, what is this? It's completely mad, and it just keeps happening. So the situation, I have to say, is dire. There's no question about it. It is dire, and that's why it is so thrilling to see so many of you here. It's so important, because we are in a real fight, and you are the army. That's why it's so important. And I just want to turn to the second part of what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, a more positive part. That's the problem. We know what the problem is. I don't need to go on about it anymore. We all know the examples. We live the examples. What's the solution? How do we get that liberty revolution? And here I want to touch on another part of my family, the family I married into. My wife, English, Rachel, her grandfather, and our friend from the UK knows this story very well, was a guy called Sir Anthony Fisher. And he was a brave fighter in the Second World War, came back from the war, and was thinking about the way society was evolving and the economy and so on. He read a very important book that really changed his thinking. The book was called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. There you are. We have some Hayek fans in the audience, no surprise. So he read this book and was very convinced by it, and was very convinced by the argument that the government centralization that had been done to fight the war effort, if it was left in place, would inevitably lead to a centralization and government control over everything. Hayek at that time was in London, was teaching at the London School of Economics. And so Sir Anthony Fisher went to see him, and in a nutshell had the following conversation. That your book is incredibly important. I'd like to advance these ideas. I'm thinking of running for office. I'm going to be a Conservative member of Parliament. Any advice? And his advice was very clear. Don't do it. And the reason was very thoughtful. He said, look, we're far from winning this battle for freedom. These ideas right now seem completely outlandish, completely beyond the pale of what is acceptable in political discourse. There's no way if you became a Conservative MP and started talking about this stuff, it would be taken seriously. You have to win the battle of ideas first. Then you can start to make a difference. And he said specifically, we need to change the intellectual climate. And so if you really want to help, then what you need to do is set up a think tank to promote these ideas. That's what he did. And he was an entrepreneur, and he went about it like an entrepreneur, Sir Anthony Fisher, and he founded an organization called the Institute of Economic Affairs in London, hired a brilliant person to lead it. They started publishing papers and documents and ideas, and before long, people started becoming aware of it, and a young conservative politician started going to their events round the corner from the Parliament building in London. And she was called Margaret Thatcher, and she was very much persuaded by these ideas and helped shape her philosophy and her policy agenda, and that's how it happened. And in 1979 she was elected, and we saw the Freedom Revolution in the UK, and of course here in America, her counterpart, her great friend Ronald Reagan, they were doing it together at the same time, advancing liberty. But that was how it got going. Sir Anthony Fisher, it was just a guy who came back from the war thinking, we need to change things. It's an incredible testament to the power an individual can have, and a movement can have, and an organization that can have, that is committed to advancing liberty. By the way, I didn't really get the benefit. My wife, Rachel, I mean, the stories, we talked earlier about the kitchen table. Her kitchen table conversations were something else. I mean, she remembers literally having Hayek at the kitchen table and having conversations about free markets in her childhood, and also Milton Friedman. I hear stories about Milton Friedman. My version of that is not quite so glamorous, but definitely memorable. There was somebody, I think his name, Eamon might remember, his name called Leon Low from South Africa. Leon Low, I don't know if you're familiar. I remember this story, and I still to this day don't know whether he was joking or making a point, but I certainly remember what he said. He was talking about over-regulation and how so much of the regulation that we see and the encroachment on liberty is based on this notion that we have to protect people, health, safety. You have to protect people's safety. It's all done in the name of protecting people. And he particularly focused on the regulations around driving and cars. It's ridiculous. All these driving regulations, seat belts and airbags compulsory in cars, and all this safety stuff on the roads. It's ridiculous. If you really want to keep people safe on the roads, get rid of all of that. And instead of airbags in the car, you just need a lethal spike that shoots out anytime there's an accident. Then people will be aware that they have to drive safely, and that's the best incentive for safety. So I don't know whether he was joking or just making a point about incentives, but it was very memorable. So that was the household, that was the environment that I married into, and it was such an amazing education for me. Certainly the first book that I wrote, the one in defense of the free market, I literally wrote that at that same kitchen table in their house of my mother-in-law, Linda Whetstone, who went on, Sir Anthony Fisher's daughter, who went on to lead a fantastic effort to promote free market ideas around the world, sadly died just over a year ago, and has just really taught me so much about how important the fight for liberty is and how we can't let go of it. Now, the final point I want to make, however, is a challenge to not the people in this room, but I suppose I would say to the conservative community generally right now in America, because I see something I think is a little bit damaging and unhelpful, which is that this argument that Hayek made to Sir Anthony Fisher, who founded the IEA, don't go straight for elected office, got to change the climate of opinion. There is an echo of that in a phrase you hear more and more these days on the conservative side of the argument, which is, I think it's attributed to Breitbart, which is culture is upstream from politics, or the other way. Maybe I've got that the right way around. It's not about, we've got to do culture first, you've got to fight culture first, and then politics will follow. I think, as I observe the scene, that some conservatives have taken that too far. All they want to do is fight culture wars. All they want to do is talk about how culture is really important. And it is, I'm not denying that. But in the end, the point about the IEA, the Institute of Economic Affairs in London, was that Mrs. Thatcher came to the meetings, adopted the ideas as her policies, and then won an election and put the ideas into practice. You have to win power to make the changes that you need to see, that you want to see. It's not enough to fight culture wars. It's not enough to have interesting conversations. You have to fight and win elections. And that's where I think broadly the conservative movement is falling down, particularly, I may say, in places like California, because actually, if you look at this state, people write it off and say, well, it's so deep blue and nothing's going to change, and they're here forever. I think that is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Even in the last election for governor, which people say, well, there you are, that's another example of how hopeless it is. The way you hear people talk about this state of California, which, remember, it is the 5th or 4th largest economy in the world. And when they talk about California being a model for the nation, they mean it as a compliment. We certainly don't. If we want to defeat the ideas that are crushing liberty in America, we need to defeat them here in California, because this is where they come from. And it's not enough just to win the argument, we have to win elections. But when you hear people talk about California, it's, oh, it's hopeless. Anyone would think the split in the vote was 80-20, something like that. No, it was 60-40. And with a candidate that wasn't the best known and not the best funded on the Republican side, nice guy, Brian Daly, but not the most well-known or well-funded candidate, got 40%. That is not an outlandish task to close that gap. It is not by any means inconceivable, unachievable. We can do it, but we have to get organized. We have to get together. We have to focus on winning elections. That's what we have to do. And we have to start early. We can't leave it to the last minute. We can't put up a candidate a couple of months before a recall election and expect to win. We have to make the case. We have to show that, unlike the Democrats, we are not ideologues who endlessly want to just signal our ideology and how virtuous we are to the far left extremists, in their case, who control their party. We are practical people with common sense ideas that will make life better, that will improve the schools, that will keep the lights on, that will make our energy system reliable, that will make it possible to run a small business and thrive, that will provide the housing we need by getting rid of the ridiculous regulations. You know, these are practical policies that will solve the homeless crisis, that will actually fight crime. These are the things we need to be talking about. These are the things we need simple, practical policy ideas on, and then go and sell them to people. Get organized. Get confident in our ability to make this change happen, because I'm totally convinced we can do it. And that's why I am very confident that the next revolution will be a California revolution. Thank you very much.
Ask you before I get the other questions. You've talked in your work about how you loved, when you were 16 years old, you loved that feeling of going to get your first job and that feeling of independence and how great that was. You associated money with independence. I remember that feeling, and I'm sure most of you do as well. So many in California, they don't get their driver's licenses, they don't have part-time jobs, and particularly in the Bay Area. And I wonder what you make of this and what it says about us.
It's lovely to find someone who's actually read the books. Very nice. Thank you very much. I don't remember which one I wrote that in, but I do feel it very, very strongly. And I'm not bragging. I went to Oxford University, very nice, but I think I learned much more from the jobs that I did, both in my gap year between school and university, where I worked for a construction company in London. That taught me more than anything, actually, than anything I learned in university. I'm not knocking university, but I'm just telling you from my experience, the most useful things that I learned were from working. My first job, as I mentioned, when I was that sort of age, at McDonald's. I think it's incredibly important. I say this to my two sons all the time. I sound like I'm joking, but I'm not really when I tell them, well, you're going to have to go and work in McDonald's or whatever. And I think it's really important. I think that work experience teaches you so much. I don't really understand why it's frowned upon, but I think that it's part of this culture I see, and it kind of reflects what I particularly see on the left, which is this everything is ideology. It's got so removed from practicality. Well, you see it in their policies. It's all these kind of vague, statements and slogans and so on, rather than kind of, okay, how do we actually solve a problem? And I think it's the same with life. It's just, it's all kind of contemplating life and introspection and sort of asking these questions about identity. You see this endless focus on identity. I keep saying, do you think this is what they're doing in China? Talking about identity? No, they're figuring out how to build the things that are going to beat us. And so that's the attitude we need. I completely agree with the thrust of your question. I agree with what I wrote then, even more so now, I guess.
So we hear some new expressions in the last few years that we had to get used to. Nobody had heard of social distancing before. It didn't exist, right? Cisgender was something that nobody had understood. There's some new language on the scene, though, coming from both sides. And one of it is this expression we heard this week, socializing the debt.
Yes.
And the other one I wanted to ask you about was American globalist regime. How do you respond to those?
Did you say American globalist regime?
Yes.
I don't know. Look, this is, to be perfectly honest with you, this is
Please do.
straying into the sort of territory that I do try to avoid, because it ends up being these somewhat esoteric questions rather than, okay, how do we fix the schools? And so on the American globalist thing, look, I've been a big critic of the way in which many policy decisions that affect our daily lives are increasingly taken by unaccountable multilateral institutions. In the UK, the classic example of that was the EU, which is why I was a strong supporter of Brexit. I actually went back to the UK to argue for Brexit. Because in the end, and that's the genius of America, I thought, that we believe in self-government, limited government by the Constitution, and people should be elected and accountable. And these unelected institutions, particularly globally, and these commitments that are made, and I've seen it from the inside. You mentioned earlier, I've seen how these things are put together. Literally, whether you have these summits, whether they're particular topic-related summits like the Paris climate thing, or the general workings of these institutions. I'll tell you a specific story on this. When first we were in number 10 Downing Street, I remember one morning, it must have been a few months into it, and there's a radio there's a radio channel that is very, most people who work in politics and government and so on, as well as many people who don't, it's a very big audience, listen to in the mornings. It's called the Today program. It's on the radio, not the TV. And I remember one morning coming into 10 Downing Street and I'd heard something on the news that was announcing that the government was doing, I don't even remember what it was about, it was doing something, announced today that it was going to implement something. And I remember going in to see the Prime Minister, who was the head of the government, saying, "Did you know about this?" He said, "No." I said, "It's terrible. Why are we doing this?" And he said, "I don't know." So I set about investigating. How is it that I, as the chief strategist of the government, the Prime Minister, as the elected head of the government, not only didn't know about this major announcement, but actually actively disagreed with it? And so it turned out, and I'll spare you all the details, but it's an amazing story in one sense, and it shows you what's gone wrong, which is that it turns out that most of the things that affect our lives are not actually the legislation that at least you can see that because a bill is presented, whether that's in Congress here or the state legislature in Sacramento or the UK Parliament. There's a piece of legislation, it's printed, you can look at it, you can follow its progress and see if it becomes law. That's some part of what happens, but most of it is this daily functioning of what we've now learned to call the administrative state, the bureaucracy, implementing this rule here or that rule there or this program, whatever. So I was curious as to how this all worked and what proportion of what we were doing as the UK government was actually that kind of activity. And it turned out that, and I asked, and also, by the way, we had a government with a very specific program that had been negotiated with our coalition partner, the coalition agreement. So over a certain period, I asked for an audit. What proportion of the things that we are doing are necessary for the implementation of the program that we are elected on? And the answer came back 30%. 70% was something else. 40% of the 70% was implementing directives from the EU. The remaining 30% just from inside the technocratic, bureaucratic machine. And if you look at the process by which these things agreed, they give you basically no time. The politicians have no time to read or respond. It just goes through because the technocrats and the bureaucrats are brilliant at just managing the paper flow to make all this possible. And that is what's happening in governments all around the world, at the national level, here at the state level. The politicians aren't in control of it. If you look at what's going on here in California, most of these terrible things we see being implemented, they're not actually Gavin Newsom doing something. It's these various boards that we've, the Air Resources Board or the Coastal Commission or whatever, the Coastal Commission are ones that killed the desalination plant, for example, down in Southern California. On and on. You look at all these things that affect us. It's these anonymous, unaccountable, unelected bureaucracies. And so in terms of the globalists, there's a long answer to the globalist question, but you see that at the global level too. And so I'm very against that. But I do find some of this language that is used in a way unhelpful, because we've got to focus on the practical problems that we need to solve and what our practical solutions are.
I think we need a lot more practical solutions. How many people in here are excited to hear Steve talk about that? Yeah. So practically speaking, you mentioned the 60-40 split, right? It's not insurmountable,
yeah.
But it's only not insurmountable if we have fair elections. Want to talk a little bit about how we can manage the elections and the ballot harvesting issue?
Well, look, I think again, I've noticed a tendency, which I have to be honest, I don't particularly think is helpful, which is to almost use the way the election administration works to say, look, we're never going to win because they're always going to rig it and steal it and whatever. That's not going to help us win. The fact is, it may be, it may not be, whatever. There are elections, even, let's just give the people who make that argument, let's just give them everything they say. Even under that system, we got 40%. And so my point is this, the rules clearly that were used, I think the pandemic was exploited to put in place rules that are complete. I mean, look, when I first heard the term ballot harvesting, I thought it was a joke. I think you can't be serious. This can't be legal. And then you dig into it and you see that there's no limits on it. And one person can literally collect thousands of votes and hand them in. I mean, it's just insane, but it's the law. And so my argument is very simple. If we think the rules are stacked against us, then the only way we change them is to win elections so we can get in power and change the rules. So we have to play with the rules that are there and beat them at their own game. That is the only way to do this. The only way to do this. So this is what I say, talk about being practical. We can go on and have a conversation about how unfair it all is. That doesn't help you win elections. What we need to do is register voters and get really good at ballot harvesting. That's what we need to do.
We are notoriously bad at messaging on Team Liberty, right? I mean, we have...
I'm not sure about that.
Well, I think that we have on our side, we generally have the truth, we have the facts, we have a lot of smart people, but we're not very good at storytelling, and somehow they out message us. Where do you see hope in the future with messaging?
Well, I mean, I would say that's really what I'm trying to do, in a way. I think that's why I've decided that I think there is a role to play here in California, particularly, to try and turn things around. And so that's why I've started this show. That's nothing to do with Fox. That's why I'm really focusing on these issues. That's why I'm out and about more here. That's my answer is, look, you can't, what's the phrase? You can't boil the ocean, but you are in control of what you do. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
And you're doing it well. And we thank you for doing it. We thank you for doing it with us, right? One of the audience members wants to talk about here's a very practical problem. What would you do about shouting down speakers like they're allowing at Stanford right now?
Oh, outrageous. I could not believe, well, so actually that's a cliche. Of course we can believe it. It's still shocking though. That Stanford situation and you know, I often think when I see this, could I even have done what I did? I taught at Stanford when we moved here just over 10 years ago. I taught there for a couple of years. And I just wonder whether that would even be possible today in the current climate, having come from a conservative government in the UK and so on. And so I think it's, well, I've got one answer, which is not a quick fix, but I think it is the answer in the long term. And it's something I'm really excited about. I don't know if you've actually, perhaps you've had them speak here, as in a good, you know, spirit of liberty. The answer is competition. And what I'm really excited about is this new university that's being established in Austin, Texas, the University of Austin, Texas, with some brilliant people behind it. Neil Ferguson from Stanford, good friend of ours. Barry Weiss, another good friend, she's there. Joe Lonsdale, a good friend. It's not just my friends, I have to say, but I happen to be friends with a lot of the people. Joe Lonsdale, fantastic entrepreneur from around here, is a real driving force behind it. They're making absolutely incredible progress. I mean, the numbers that they tell about just the first summer where, I mean, they got going a couple of years ago with the idea. They're raising the money. They've got their site established in Austin. They've bought the land. They've commissioned the build. It's all getting going. But even in the first summer, which I think was this summer just gone, where they had some prototype classes, not even in the actual, they haven't built the campus yet. So they had some prototype classes just for a couple of hundred students. They were overwhelmed with applications from around the country. They hardly did any marketing. They had something like 10,000 applications for 200 places, and it was mostly from the elite from the Stanfords and the Yales and the Princeton, people who are sick and tired of it, who just realize it's not worth it anymore. And I think in the long term, these universities are discrediting themselves, and you will see this competition rise up and take their place. And so actually, that is one of the great things that we have here in America, that the UK, just the various capacities in the UK just don't make it so possible, is that we're big enough, with enough, you know, rich philanthropy-minded people who believe in liberty, to start institutions like that and to really mount a challenge to these elite institutions that have just been completely captured. So I am hopeful that that's the way we'll get there. It just may take a little, I mean, obviously we'd like to kind of wave a wand and stop it all right now. And that's what we'd love to do for the students who are suffering under this ridiculous nonsense today. But I think that's hard, it's hard to see how that happens. I mean, just to give you an example on the Stanford case, they issued a sort of slightly wishy-washy apology the next, you know, after a couple of days.
Yeah.
But then what happened? I think yesterday, hundreds of Stanford students protested the dean who issued the apology. I mean, it's, you know, it's gone very far. And so I think in the end, competition is going to solve this problem for us.
Oh, it is so mind-boggling what's going on over there. You know, they had, when Trump won the election, they had news go out to all the faculty and staff that if you needed a counseling session or a puppy or something, I don't know, perhaps our friend Autumn would have been useful that day. These are the best and brightest, right? But yeah, anyway, that is hopeful what's going on, very hopeful what's going on in Texas, Steve. I agree with you. That would be, if we have competition in education, terrific. Give us a sense of who and what the major hurdles are in California regarding energy.
Well, the hurdle is the madness of the policy. I mean, it's just totally incoherent. I mean, I've made this point many times. Of all the crazy policies, both at the federal and the state level, the energy policy is perhaps the worst, because it's so totally incoherent. Just to give you one statistic that captures the madness of California energy policy, I have discovered that the proportion of the oil, California's oil imports, have doubled under the Democrats. These people who go on and on about how much they hate fossil fuels, they've doubled oil imports. Arnold Schwarzenegger, you may all not be huge fans of him, I'm a good friend of his, he points out that if you take the 15 biggest ships, cargo ships traveling the oceans, they produce more carbon emissions than all the cars in the world. Right, the 15 biggest.
Did you say 15 ships?
15, 1-5, yes. That's what he says, and then he says that, and I checked it up, and there's data on this, and 40% of the cargo on these cargo ships are fossil fuels. So, and what are we doing? That's what we're doing in California. That's what they're doing. They've doubled the proportion of our energy, because what do they want to do? They want to make us more reliant on energy sources that are less reliable, because they're obsessed with wind and solar. I mean, we know they're anti-nuclear, even though it's carbon-free. They even classify, unbelievably, hydroelectric power is not considered renewable. If you look at the breakdown in the California energy thing, hydroelectric is not listed under renewable. So the answer is we need to elect someone who will fire every single member of the various agencies that preside over these insane policies. I mean, that's the answer.
You know, I really don't think you could make up what Steve just shared with you. I'm really trying to absorb that.
Well, I mean, it's just crazy. And they, I mean, I could go on and on in detail because there's so much madness to it. But at the same time, as they can't keep the lights on now because the grid is unreliable, they want to make us more dependent on it, of course. We talked about that earlier with everything being electrified. I mean, they can't meet the demand now. So what's going to happen? Well, everything is reliant on the grid. It just makes no sense whatsoever. But it doesn't matter. I think it's the perfect example, actually, of their approach. This is what I was talking about earlier. It's not about the practicality. It's about the ideology. We used to call it virtue signaling. I try not to say that anymore because there's nothing virtuous about it. It's pure ideology signaling. It's signaling to the activists who really control everything about the party these days on the left. Yes, I'm with you on your climate. I tick the box. I say that I'm with you on the most extreme things you want me to say. I will say them. That's where we are.
Yeah. So I know you had, or I think anyway, that you had chickens at one point.
Yes, we do. We have 10 chickens right now. The number goes up and down. There's natural attrition there, but also, you know, a bit of... actually, one funny thing I have to tell you. My two sons, one of them has still got a very strong English accent and the other has a very American accent. So we were just talking about this actually just this evening because his teacher corrected him over his pronunciation, the one who speaks with the British accent, and the word that he objected to, highly relevant to the chickens. And I found myself telling this story to someone at Fox News in the early days when I was here. I was over in New York. And they were interested, and they'd heard about the chicken thing, and I was chatting about the chickens and said, oh, do you lose any to, I think they said foxes, kind of an East Coast question, you know, like foxes or whatever they have there. I said, not really, but we do have a problem with hawks. And she looked at me and said, what is a hawk? And I said, oh, she doesn't, hawk. So we have a problem with hawks and our chickens. And it's one of those words you have to say in an American accent. Otherwise, people don't really know what you're saying. Yes, we still have the chickens, despite the activities of the hawks in our neighborhood.
All right, well, I've lost my train of thought with that one, but where I was going with that, Steve, was with chickens and eggs, and what we saw with the bank this week, there's a lot of concern about having central bank digital currency and that we might all end up trading eggs and chickens. And do you want to say something about
what, the return of the barter economy?
Yeah, do you want to say something about what that might look like?
I don't know. I mean, look, I'm very skeptical. I don't know enough. I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know enough about it. I have to be honest, and I have friends who are very, very well informed about all of this, and the blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin, all these things. However many times it's been explained to me, I don't really understand it. That's the honest truth. And I keep saying, okay, explain, draw it for me, and I just don't, my brain doesn't work this way. And so I'm not ready, I would say, to have a really clear judgment. Perhaps the first time I'm not going to be clear with you because I truly don't know. The sound, look, a lot of the people I respect are very nervous about the prospect of a digital currency operated by central banks. And so on the basis of I trust those people on other subjects. That seems to make sense to me, but I wouldn't want to volunteer a more detailed opinion than that.
Okay. So we are a nonpartisan group, but there are a lot of questions up here, a big stack of them actually, about the integrity of the California Republican Party.
Okay. And what's the question?
And the question is, I mean, you've encouraged people to run, you've encouraged people to get involved, and that's great. And the question is how do we work with that? Because there's a lot of sense in the room that the cards are, the deck is stacked.
I'm afraid I really don't understand the question. Do you mean within the Republican Party?
Yeah.
In what way? I truly.
I think that the question from this crowd is that the conservatives in the Republican Party really don't have a chance because of the rhinos. So that's where they're coming from.
So I've got a general observation, which this is not a comment on the current Republican Party at all. I'm not weighing in on that, but I do have a general observation, which is this. Going back to our earlier point, very simple math, right? You've got to go from 40% to 50% plus one vote. How are we going to do that? The 40% have to stay together. And we got to win a share of the independents and the Democrats. It's like very basic. And so at this point, my view is very much, and as I say, I'm not saying that this is the view of I don't have anything to do with the state Republican Party. I'm an independent operator in that sense. My view is very clearly that we cannot afford factionalism. We cannot afford it. We really can't, because you can say within the Republican Party, this person has views that I agree with 100%, and this person has views I agree with 60%, but even the 60% person is going to be a lot better than the Democrat alternative. And so we have to just not go down that path of poisonous factionalism. And then the idea of excluding energetic candidates who want to make a contribution, who want to fight the good fight, on the basis that they don't meet some kind of purity test on either side, frankly, of whatever the dividing line is within the party, I would say we just can't afford it. We just have to have everyone in the fight together on the same team, have civilized conversations about what the policy should be or whatever. But the simple goal is we've got to beat the Democrats. That's the focus.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I say that in a non-partisan enough way for your
I think so. I don't think we're going to get, we're going to have to edit that out or anything. Okay. Of course, there's the elephant in the room is, will he run for office? And of course, Senator Feinstein's seat might be available.
Right. Well, I can tell you very clearly, I'm not going to do that. Look, I definitely am thinking about getting more involved in the issues here directly. To be completely open with you, I am actually looking at getting engaged in one of the issues that really needs some kind of practical problem-solving policy thinking, but not in terms of running for office, but in terms of some kind of campaign, perhaps ending in a ballot initiative, that kind of thing. Because I think we do need to show that we are serious, practical people who want to solve problems. We're not extremists. We're not the caricature that the media and the Democrats paint anyone who's different to them as being. And so that's the kind of thing I'm looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in terms of a practical problem, there's a question about the problem of homelessness. Do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, funny enough, that it's related to what I want to talk to. Although the issue that I'm mostly thinking about is actually housing, because I think housing is an issue that it affects so many people, not just the people who can't afford to buy a house. And remember, home ownership is the bedrock of a free society. It's something that we should all be so passionate. Remember Margaret Thatcher, going back to her signature policy in her first administration that really cemented her connection with so many people in the UK was the sale of formerly state-owned homes to the people who lived in them. It was, in England, it was called council house sales. The council house was owned by the council, the local government, and she instituted a policy. Millions of people were able to buy the home that was previously owned by the government. It was a massive transformation and a massive extension of liberty. And so it's often overlooked that the role of housing in liberty, but actually a lot flows from that. If you own your own home, you have your independence, and you can do so much with that. And so I think it's a very foundational pro-liberty policy. Sorry, I jumped on. It's not the same as homelessness. That's a mistake that a lot of people make. It's not the same issue. They're different issues. But it reminded me that that's the issue that I'm thinking about on homelessness. Look, this is I would recommend some of the episodes on the show, on the Steve Hilton show, because I've had such great conversations with people who've really got into it, like Michael Schellenberger, like Leighton Woodhouse, who's now working with Michael Schellenberger. I think it's coming out next week. I taped a brilliant conversation with the mayor of Coronado. I mean, you may have seen him. He popped up on the national media. Yeah, he's a great guy. Is it Richard Bailey? I can't remember. Fantastic guy. And we had such a good, detailed conversation about the specifics of the policy failures that have led to this homeless crisis. And the great thing about it is that you can do something about it. It's not these Democrats for years, endless announcements about $1 billion more for homeless. None of it works because they won't address the fundamental problem, which is one, that there's a law enforcement aspect here. There are laws against what people living on the streets, defecating on the streets. There are municipal codes and county codes. They just need to be enforced. Also, you've got to look at the fact that the vast majority of people who are living on the streets are suffering from addiction, a mental health problem. That needs to be solved permanently. Amazingly, there is a state law in California. I didn't know this till I talked about it with I think it was Leighton Woodhouse on my show, which is there's a state law that makes it illegal for state money, most of the money that goes into solving homelessness is state money, to be used by any organization that advocates or practices an abstinence-based approach to drugs. So if you are trying to get people off drugs, you can't receive state money. That's the law. All you can do is what they call harm reduction, which means keeping people on drugs and trying to limit the harm. I went round Venice, with a homelessness
it's shocking, isn't it?
non-profit, trying the abstinence approach, not being funded because they can't get any money from the state. This guy has a totally different approach. Literally rents Airbnbs, puts in a recovering addict, groups of people from the street, so they lead the process of getting them off drugs. It's a fantastic example of how charities and non-profits and faith-based organizations know what needs to be done, but they can't be funded. And so what you actually have is all this money that we keep hearing them announce. It goes into these programs. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but he said, and they give them the housing units and the which cost, what is it, $800,000 each in Los Angeles now. He said basically it's like giving them a second home, because they have the home that they're given, but they're back on the streets dealing drugs. And that's what they do, and the criminal gangs around there. And unless you get people off drugs, you're not going to solve the problem. And that is the unfathomable mystery of why a decade into this, with billions and billions of dollars spent, the homeless population has gone up, not down.
We have a lot of unfathomable mysteries, don't we? As I'm listening to Steve, I just keep thinking, well, of course. It's like a tonic, isn't it, just to hear practical ideas that make complete sense in this room? Right?
Well, I think this is the point I would really emphasize to all of us as we kind of think about trying to turn things around, is that we have to operate on that level. I'm really convinced of it. And if you listen to a lot of conservative media, again, not critical of anyone, people do what they do and there's an audience for that, whatever. It's not me. I think we have to just focus on practical problem solving, because that's the way to connect with the 10% extra that we need to get over that 50% hurdle. People who are not ideological, they don't watch all the cable news, they're not on these weird podcasts or whatever, they're just trying to get on with their life. And they are desperate, I think, for someone who's just not ideological, who's just going to say, right, this is what we're going to do to solve this problem, that doesn't come across like an extremist, that doesn't come across like an ideologue, that just comes across as someone who's going to solve problems.
You're so refreshing, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
All right. You really are. By the way, Andrew Breitbart was on this stage, and you reminded me tonight of that, of the incredible voices that we've heard in this room with just great ideas and a lot of solutions. Let's talk about the kids for a second. There's some questions about, you're a father, and there's some questions about how to get a reasonable education for your children in California. What do you have any parenting advice? That's what the question is.
Oh, parenting advice?
No, that's a big one, isn't it? Well, no, particularly around the children being indoctrinated.
Again, I think that the answer here is competition. We have a government school monopoly, and we see the results of that. I mean, the exact people who claim to be motivated by equity, as they now call it, particularly racial equity. We have a situation where in California, across the state, a black child is on average 4 years worth of education behind a white child. That's what we've ended up with. 4 years behind. That's what's been produced. And they keep talking about resources. The average cost per pupil of a public school in Los Angeles County is higher than the average cost of a private school place. It's not that they're short of money. A huge amount of money has gone in, and even more, that's the per pupil cost for the schools. If you look at the amount of money that's going in from the budget overall, when you look at the luxury pensions and healthcare for the teacher unions, a huge amount of money is going into our education system. And yet they keep asking for, and they keep saying, we need more resources, we need more. And no, we need basic educational standards implemented. Parents know that, good teachers know that. We've got to get rid of this ideology that drives the school system. It seems to me, although you will have, and you can find, individual principals of schools and teachers within schools, within the public school system, who are doing a fantastic job standing up against it, against all odds. I don't see a way to solve this unless we break the public school monopoly. That is the only way, I think, to do it, because the teacher unions have such a strong grip on power. They're pretty much the most powerful organization in California. It's totally corrupt. They buy the perks that they get from taxpayers by funding the politicians who get elected. We hear all the time about big money in politics and big business buying up the policies they want. It's exactly the same and even worse here in California with the government unions. An interesting book today I just came across, by the way, which I'm very keen to dig into. I've just, is it Philip K. Howard? Is that, I can't remember, I may be getting that wrong. It's a book, I think the book title is Not Accountable, reviewed in the Wall Street Journal today. And it includes the argument that government unions per se are unconstitutional, which I was very interested to read. So I'm very keen to explore that. But I think that is the only answer, and I think that the way to do it is to move towards school choice. That is not an easy job because of the way things are set up here in California, but it's incredibly exciting to see what's going on in other states. You look at Iowa, they've just passed a total voucher system. You look at Arizona, who did it first. Across the country it's happening, and you can say, well, they're Republican states, and that's all true. One day California will be a Republican state. So don't give up hope. And then the final thing I'll say on this is we have in our ranks, I read out this quote when I came across it the other week on my Fox show. Some of you may have seen it. A very powerful ally for school choice, someone who wrote in 2003 in a book, the best argument I've ever heard for school choice, who was advocating a total voucher system, fully funded vouchers for every pupil. Senator Elizabeth Warren. So there we are. If it's good enough for her in 2003, I think one day we'll make it happen here.
Pocahontas once more. Wow. Oh, God, wouldn't that be great? School vouchers for everyone. Be fantastic.
By the way, this was seen as such a... I mean, I advocated this in, I think, the second book, in More Human, where I made the argument that, and the theme of that book is that everything is too big and centralized and bureaucratic and distant from the human scale. Food, healthcare, everything, education, and we need to decentralize power. That's, I think, one of the reasons that I feel so strongly proud to be an American and to really, deeply cherish the Constitution, because that idea of decentralization of power is so deeply embedded in the Constitution. Of course, ignored the whole time. That's why I'm obsessed with the 10th Amendment, by the way. But the ultimate decentralization, as I've always argued, I argued this when I was working in 10 Downing Street, I argued it in that book, is decentralization to individual people, so that they have the power to make decisions. So put the power in the hands of individuals where possible. Where that's not possible, the lowest tier of government that makes sense, local government, then state government, and only where necessary, the federal government. That's the sort of hierarchy that I would advocate, have advocated for as long as I can remember. They call it subsidiarity, I believe. I had a great conversation with the Archbishop of San Francisco, who told me it was a Catholic term. I always thought that it was a bogus EU term that they used but then breached the whole time. Subsidiarity, power to the lowest possible level. And of course, vouchers is the ultimate expression of that. When I wrote this, when was that? 8 years ago, it seemed really outlandish, the idea that you could have a total choice system. That's what they've just passed in Iowa. Total choice. Every parent gets a voucher. I think in 2 years, that's what they'll get to. It's a real revolution. It's very exciting.
That would be, it would just be incredible coming from here, because it's true, what happens here gets spread across the nation, right? And if we're not careful, we're going to have a prom king election. It's going to be about Newsom's hair, I think. And we really don't want to export that. But do you see any of what you're talking about, the competition that you'd like to see in schools in tech?
Well, look, it's a very, do you mean in tech generally, or in the social media sector where there's no competition? Which do you?
I guess I mean the social media.
Right.
I mean,
So
let
tech
me
generally
rephrase that, in big tech.
Right, big tech. Okay, so I think that's right. And there's a point I've made in the few days when there's been a lot of schadenfreude about what's happened here in Silicon Valley. And as someone who started a tech company here and was, raised money, and the investors said, you've got to go to Silicon Valley Bank. And I was one of the customers of Silicon Valley Bank, not anymore. We sold the business, but and we went there because the investors said go there. And so that's an interesting dynamic that I think people need to look into. But the point I'd make is that actually there's a lot of competition, a lot of healthy competition. There's a lot of really hardworking people around here who are sincerely motivated by building products and services that actually aim to solve problems and give people a good experience and improve their lives. I think the vast majority of people are doing that. So the image of big tech, I think we mustn't cloud our view of what this whole community that we're all here as part of is doing, and we shouldn't want it to fail, despite the fact that we must stand up to the outrageous behavior of big tech and the collusion between big tech and big government. That's the terrifying thing. That's what we've seen in the last, really since 2016. I documented this on my show just before Christmas. It's absolutely terrifying. The mission creep, where they started off with this social media censorship strategy from inside the government. This was under the Trump administration, so it's not political. This is the FBI and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And it was all about stopping Russian interference. That was the premise. And then over time, they changed. And after 2020, it moved from being Russian interference to it's all recorded. Now the biggest threat is domestic political activism, and so they started targeting that, election denialism and all the rest of it. And then in the pandemic, they switched again to all the COVID stuff. And that was now the focus of the collusion between big tech and big government. It's all documented, like literally documented, how they weren't even afraid to put it down and talk about it in internal meetings, and we had all the evidence. We laid it out on my show. And now, what's the latest? Just last week, you hear, was it Senator Mark Kelly calling for censorship of comments on Silicon Valley Bank in case it prompts a bank run. Can you censor? Literally, that was the question.
He said that out loud.
Can you censor people talking about Silicon Valley Bank or their bank? I mean, what is this? So it's very frightening. Competition is happening. You mentioned Rumble. I mean, that's real. That is real competition. And exactly, so that's real. And so I think that I think there is a role for that. I think the problem is, to be technical about it, is actually the philosophy of Silicon Valley. So there's this phrase that is used by investors, by the tech community. Many of you may have come across it, called network effects. And so what investors are looking for when for a certain kind of business is, do you have network effects? Which means the more people use your service, the more valuable it becomes. What it really means is, can you become a monopoly? And that's what they're hoping you'll say. Yes, we can become a monopoly. The more people use it, the more valuable it is. There's no point having a social network with no one on it. And so they've demonstrated that does indeed work. And so you have a few giant companies dominating. I mean, in the past, I have advocated breaking them up, actually. And I don't know if I still think that's the sensible thing to do. I think that it is true that we need to make sure that China doesn't overtake us in any of this space. You see what's going on with TikTok. And so I think that it needs to be a combination of encouraging competition and making sure competition isn't crushed, but also with things like the reform of Section 230, smart regulation, because in the end, these social networks, big tech, they're really like the utilities. They really are. They're essential to modern life. And so we have no qualms about, in fact, I would argue the utilities here, especially since I had a power outage tonight, are not regulated enough, because they seem to be pushed, they seem to not be delivering their core mission at all. I suppose you could say they've been pushed too far, to certainly up with the utilities, to just a bit like some of the banks. The kind of climate priorities have made them ignore their responsibilities to maintain a basic service. But I think sensible regulation is probably a part of it too. I think breaking them up, I don't think that will solve the problem.
Well, I'm going to ask Steve one more question, and as I ask him this, I'd like you to ask yourself this. What are you willing to do for liberty this month?
Interesting.
Steve, what would you like to encourage people to do? No, I'm not going to. I'm asking you a different question, right? By the way, Steve is so delightful, and I've been thinking the whole time, I wonder if he's so delightful because he's so not stressed out from having a cell phone. It's just such a pleasure, right? Our audience likes to have practical things to do. So when they wake up tomorrow morning, what can they actually do? What can the average person do? What can the person who cares about liberty in California do tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I want to go back to what I said about political activism and engagement. I really do. I think that's what's important. So I'm just telling you, the first thing that came to my mind is register people to vote. If you have friends who aren't registered to vote, if you know people who think the way you do but aren't registered to vote, it's like the most important thing. And just get engaged in that grassroots political fight. Many of you have run for office. That's fantastic. Not everyone wants to do that. But getting engaged politically is the only way to do it, I think. That's the only, in the end, that is the practical solution. We have to win elections.
Thank you, Steve, for a warm and energetic and positive presentation. We are so lucky. We're very fortunate to have you here. It takes a Brit, evidently, to champion our freedom and to remind us, newly minted citizen, to remind us how fortunate we are in America. And Steve, if you don't have any power when you go home, you have 400 new best friends that will probably cook you a hot meal.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.